and from what little I know and what you have been sharing with me. So, Geeta and Gadagkar, I hope you wouldn't mind if I'm a little more personal in introducing you. Is that okay? Is that all right, Gadagkar?
Yeah,
Gadagkar,
yeah. Oh, sir.
are
Yes.
are you listening to me?
Certainly, certainly,
Okay with you? I do it that way?
certainly.
Okay. So, as I said, every time we have a conversation like this, I ask myself a question. What can I learn from? And what should we learn? Apart from learning from the insect societies, what can we learn from the speaker? And, I was just thinking about it. Many of my Athashrian friends would also perhaps have noticed it. That if you keep a little sugar on the table, suddenly you find ants coming to it. And then from the other side, again, ants come. And they sort of interact, touch each other, and go back or continue their passage. And I was wondering what is all going on. Then suddenly I realized that's what exactly we do in Athashri. I'm going down to the canteen, walking to the canteen, and I meet Brigadier. And I ask him, Brigadier, what's there for the canteen? What's there for the breakfast? And then he tells me something, we talk, stop to each other, and then go back. Then I meet Chandran again. Same thing happens. So I think it's amazing, but we don't know, at least I hope we learn something more from you, how the ants, what are they doing when they touch each other heads and so on. So, Gadagkar, please tell us about it when you come to it. Now, let me formally introduce you to my Athashrians, and then I'll request you to start your speech. Dear Athashrians, as I told you, we are going to be informal on this. So I'm going to introduce Gadagkar the way I know him all these years, and particularly over the last a month or two when I've been interacting with him more. Now, Gadagkar has shared with me some of his life pattern or life history. And what I was most impressed by when he said that he has had no formal education until he was 8 years old. Now, this is very strange for me, most of us. No formal education. His father was in the Indian Air Force. So he used to move around from one place to another, and the family would move. So he says he learned all these things from nature and from his friends. And he was enjoying following insects, catching tadpoles and all that. And he says, that was my best period. I will never give that experience, never have that experience again. So you get to see that here is a young man. As a child, he was already fascinated. He had already made his plans, what he's going to do. And I know this because when his guide, whom I also know, Professor Madhav Gadgil, had suggested to him to take up some topics in ecology, which was a hot topic at that time and so on. But Raghavendra Gadagkar was keen on his insects. And therefore he said, no, I want to do this. And people told him, well, you won't get a job if you do this. And he didn't care. He said, that really fascinates me and I'm going to do that. Now, he has been studying, he mentioned wasps and then bees. I don't know, there is a subtle difference between the two, and I'm sure he will tell us about it. So he has been studying these wasps and bees and all sorts of things. And I remember this whole story about his research. When I was a scientist and then turned administrator and went to the Ministry of Science and Technology, one of the role I was given was try to identify within India some outstanding young scientists who are interested in doing something unique and try to see how we could support these scientists. So certainly I went around looking at different institutions, and I was fascinated when I read about Gadagkar's ideas on trying to study insects and bees and so on. So we had a long chat, and ultimately he did submit a project, and he didn't want much money. He says, I don't want money. But we forced him, no, you must take money, you must take, which is a very unusual story. Normally as science administrator, I used to be faced with the issues that I want this, I want that, I want this equipment, I want 3 students, 4 students. Gadagkar never wanted anything. So we finally said, no, you have to do this and make sure that your students develop and you build a nice group around you. So I think he accepted our difficult challenge and took up this work, which has been pursuing for the last 2 or 3 decades. Now, it's amazing to see that not only Gadagkar as a person, but his wife also, who works with him, also in the same area. And she also, Geeta, she's on watching all of us. And Geeta also has a similar interest. And she has been also working extensively. Hi, Geeta. So she has also been working in this. So it's very happy, very, very nice to see both of us, both of them coming together. And then I probed a little bit more and I asked Gadagkar, tell me more about your family. Then he told me his son, who is in Cornell University, is also a scientist studying birds. And it's amazing. I mean, I don't know the speciality, what he's doing, but the story he told me for a common man was that he's studying birds, how they learn to sing, and how the signals which go to the brain of a bird really they teach themselves how to sing. It's like the rehearsal practice they do, I suppose. So his son has also been doing this aspects of studying the birds. So here we have, I was telling him in a lighter vein, it'll be nice if you and your son come together and you can tell us old Athashrians the story of the bird and the bees. Because the bird and the bees is something which most of us have now forgotten and it's so exciting. And I hope one of these days, Gadagkar, your son would come and join us and tell us all about his singing birds and what he's doing. So with that, with those words, I welcome you and hope you will tell us all about what the ants do, what the insects do, what the bees do, what the birds do. And let us hope that our Athashrians will get more excited about the insects we see around us. Normally we hate insects. We say we don't want insects. And we have all sorts of all out and this and that to get rid of them. But it's good that you will tell us what we should learn from this insect society. So welcome to virtual Athashri. And one of these days you have to be physically coming to us in Bangalore. Okay, thank you, you and Geeta. Most welcome. Geeta, you may also join something at the end and want to tell your experiences, but give enough time to Gadagkar. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, very well.
It's really a great pleasure to be able to speak to Athashrians. I particularly would like to thank Dr. Lavkare for finding me and reconnecting after all these years. And because of talking to him recently, my sort of experience in life, I thought I'll talk to you today not just about what insects do or what we do with insects, but actually about what we can learn from insects. Actually, there's a great deal that we can learn from insects. And in doing so, I will show you some pictures, some slides. I will share my screen with you. And can you see my slide, which says, what can we learn from insect societies? It turns out that many species of insects organize themselves into what we might legitimately call societies. These insect societies are similar to human societies in many ways, and I believe that they are superior to human societies in some ways. The best known examples of such insects which organize themselves into societies are those of ants, honeybees, wasps, and termites. And I will give you a brief introduction to what these societies do and then turn to what we can learn from them. So in the next slide, you will see a very familiar sight. This is a colony of honeybees, which all of you would have seen. Honeybees live in these colonies with tens of thousands of individuals clinging together, working together. If you see this picture, you would wonder how they can do any work because it's also crowded. In fact, this is a particularly small colony of bees. This picture was taken by my student on our campus, and I use this picture because this is actually a very special kind of honeybee. There are really 4 main kinds of honeybees in the world, and this is a particularly Asian bee. And this is considered the most primitive of all honeybees. And as scientists, we are interested in this honeybee because we want to know how all the other honeybees became so social, because this allows us to understand the roots of honeybee social behavior. So if you look at the bee colony closely, you will find that in every colony there is a large female bee, which we call the queen bee. And in fact, the queen bee here is in the center of this picture. And as you will see, she's surrounded by a small group of smaller bees. These are also females, and these are the so-called worker bees. Now here, actually, these worker bees are only about 10, 12 of them, although in the colony there may be 40, 50,000 individuals. These workers, if you use human language, they are on special royal duty. They are actually now surrounding the queen, protecting the queen, taking care of the queen, cleaning her, feeding her. She has no time for all of these things. So they actually do all this for her. They feed her. The queen is actually very busy doing two things. One is she's eating and converting the food into eggs, and she's laying eggs. The other is she's converting some of the food she eats into different kinds of chemical substances, which she's releasing outside her body, which will have effects on the workers. And I'll talk a little bit about these. These chemicals that she releases outside the body are called pheromones. So she lays eggs and she releases pheromones, and she's too busy, so she's being taken care of. Now, the interesting thing is, if you watch this live for some time, you'll be surprised to find that some of these worker bees seem to lose interest in the queen and go off and do something else. And other workers will come and take their place. So these workers actually work in shifts. And this has a great advantage because by working in shifts, a very large number of different workers can come in close proximity with the queen and therefore can get the pheromone that she is producing. The worker bees, of course, in addition to the queen, they go out, they fly in search of food. Their food consists of two items, nectar and pollen, both of which they gather from flowers. The nectar is their source of carbohydrate, pollen is their source of protein. They will gather all of these, return to the hive, store it there and use it as food. But when a single bee goes and finds a large tree in bloom with hundreds, maybe thousands of flowers and lots of nectar, she is simply not capable of bringing it all back by herself. So she comes home and recruits other bees to help her in this. And the way she recruits is actually through a dance language. Honeybees actually have a language, and that language is through dancing. So a German zoologist called Carl von Frisch, whose picture you see here at the top left-hand corner, discovered that honeybees have a language. He deciphered the language, and he actually was awarded the Nobel Prize for that in 1973. He showed that bees will return home and perform a dance, and through this dance, they will communicate to the bees at home several things. What kind of food they have found, how far away from home, and in fact, how to get there. And once the bees at home watch this dance, they have this knowledge. Now they don't need the original bee anymore. They can go and find that food. There is something very remarkable about honeybees. Many of you may have been stung by honeybees. Some of you may have been stung. It's painful for us, but actually for the bee, it's much worse. Every act of stinging for a bee is an act of suicide. Because when the bee inserts its sting into our body, it is not able to withdraw it back because the sting has thorns pointing upwards. And when the bee tries to withdraw the sting, actually her abdomen ruptures and she leaves behind her part of her digestive system. The sting and the poison gland, which is associated with sting, is left on our body. This bee flies away to die within a few minutes. But this poison gland, even in the absence of the owner, continues to pump venom into our body. And people have measured this for up to 60 seconds after the bee has flown away. Which means that this is an extremely efficient venom delivery mechanism, although it means death to the individual bee. So the bees are willing to sacrifice their life for the welfare of their colony. Now, bees are not the only insect societies. Other famous examples are the ants. What you see on this picture is a large number of ants belonging to a group which we called weaver ants. We call them weaver ants because these ants actually build a nest by stitching silk leaves together. You see here a very large number of ants are have got hold of these two leaves, and they're trying to bring these leaves together with their combined effort. And you can imagine how much cooperation and coordination this will require. Eventually, they will build bridges between these leaves, and they will shorten the bridges by individual ants dropping off from the bridge and align these two leaves. Once they are aligned, they will actually stitch the leaves together, and you can see here being stitched. This is silk, by the way. They stitch these leaves with silk fibers. Now, where do they get the silk from? Adult ants cannot produce silk, but ant larvae, which you see here, they can produce silk. And when the leaves are aligned together, one of the ants will go inside, catch hold of a fully grown larva, bring her outside, squeeze it appropriately, and persuade it to donate some silk for the community purpose of building a nest. That's how they build a nest. Other examples are, of course, termites, which all of you are familiar. In fact, this is a picture of a termite mound, which I took from outside my bedroom window in the Indian Life Science campus. If you break this open and go a little bit underneath, you will see a whole colony of termites. This is an artist's rendering of what a termite colony might look like. In the case of termites, there is not only a large queen here, but there are also kings. In fact, this little guy is a king, and they live together and they mate periodically and they produce lots of children. The interesting thing about termites is all the work is done by the children. The children are put to work, and in fact, they are not given any time to grow up. I always say that this is the ultimate example of child labor. In fact, most of the children work and die working for the welfare of the colony. This brings me to the next example, and that of wasps, which are my favorite kind of insect societies. Social wasps are called paper wasps. And the reason why they are called paper wasps is because they build their nests not from soil as termites do, not from leaves as ants do, not from wax as bees do, but in fact from paper. Where do they get paper? They manufacture paper. How do they manufacture paper? In much the same way that we manufacture paper. They scrape cellulose fibers from plants, chew it up, add various chemicals, make it into a fine pulp, spread it into a thin layer and dry it. In fact, you can write on it. It is paper. This is a wasp. Let me go back to the previous slide. This is a wasp nest which is covered with a paper envelope, leaving only a small opening for the wasp to fly in and out. Now, if you open this envelope, what you will see is what I like to call a multi-storied apartment complex. So you see here there are many, many layers of comb, all of this made from paper, and this is where they rear their young ones. Now, there is indeed a great deal we can learn from insect societies, and there are lessons for many different kinds of people. For example, there is a lot that chemists can learn from insect societies. There is a lot that farmers can learn from insect societies. There are things that IT professionals can learn from insect societies. There are things that technologists can learn from insect societies. There are many things that managers can learn from insect societies. And finally, there is much that philosophers, or should I say, retired senior citizens like us, can learn from insect societies. So I'll spend a few minutes giving you examples for each of these different kinds of things that we can learn from insect societies. Synthetic organic chemists have a great interest in the honeybee. And this is because of the pheromone I told you about. The honeybee produces chemicals which regulate, influence the behavior of the workers. In fact, amongst the many pheromones, the most famous pheromone is the so-called queen pheromone. the queen produces a blend of chemicals which is extremely attractive to the workers. In fact, that is how the workers know where the queen is and stay close to the queen. In fact, they never lose the queen because the queen is always smelling of this queen pheromone. If you take the queen away from the colony, the workers will simply follow her. They never lose her because she smells in a very special way. Now, this pheromone blend and this knowledge that it is attractive to workers has been exploited in different ways. I will give you two examples. I'll give you one funny example. This has been exploited by some people to play tricks. I don't know whether anybody of you know this, but some people are very famous for growing bee beards. They grow beards out of bees. Now, how do they do this? Actually, it's a very simple trick. Many people who do research on honeybees do this to show off to the public. They take the queen out of a bee colony, put her in a small cardboard box, make some small holes in the cardboard box for the pheromone to be able to come out, and they tie that box just below their chin with a string, plug their nose and ears with cotton plug, and in no time the workers will realize that they have lost their queen. They will also realize that the queen is inside this cardboard box, and they'll start aggregating themselves around the box. All you have to do is to keep lowering the bees a little bit so that your eyes are not covered and you have a very fine bee beard. You will find that people are able to do this very simply. Now, people have also exploited this knowledge for much more useful purposes. As you know, bees pollinate our crops. They go from flower to flower and take pollen from one flower to the other, and that's how they pollinate the flowers. And that is why we have agriculture. In fact, if we lose bees, we lose most of our food production. So people realize that if that is true, then we can increase the chances of bees going to our crops by spraying the crops with the queen pheromone. So people have isolated the molecules, and there are actually very few molecules involved, and people have organically synthesized these molecules, and they give farmers a blend, a bottle of these molecules. And the farmers then spray it on their orchards, and when they do that, you would find that there is commercial utility to this purpose. To take just a few examples, pear trees sprayed with the pheromone blend produced fruit heavier by 6%, and there was a 30% increase in profits. The net profit was $1,000 or more per hectare. Cranberry trees treated with pheromone yielded 15% more berries by weight. Net returns were $4,465 per hectare, and this is now very commonly used in some countries. Now I'll come to farmers. Farmers are interested in sustainable agriculture. The biggest problem with our agriculture is it's not sustainable. For a short while, we can produce a great deal, but it's not sustainable. Now, if we want sustainable agriculture, we can learn a great deal from the ants. Some of you may be surprised to know that ants also practice agriculture. In fact, they practice agriculture of a kind which is very similar to our agriculture. The only thing is, they have been doing it for 50 million years. They do not grow flowering plants like us, they grow fungi. Actually, they grow a kind of mushrooms. Now, the most famous agriculturists among ants are the so-called leafcutter ants of South America. What happens here is that we can learn much from them. Here, for example, is a leafcutter ant. She has left her nest. She has gone in search of leaves of a particular kind. They're very choosy about what leaves they use. And then with her very sharp mandibles, she is able to cut the leaf into small pieces of the size appropriate for her to carry it back. And once she is able to cut it, she carries it back to her home like this, like a flag. And you will find in many South and Central American forests, thousands of ants marching in a line, all carrying a flag of leaf like this. Now, once they reach home, they just deposit this there and go back to bring some more. But other ants inside the colony, smaller ones, will shred these leaves into fine powder, add some chemicals from their own body, some saliva, make it into a paste and spread it into their agricultural garden. This is what their garden looks like. And in this garden, they will plant mushrooms. And when the mushrooms grow, they will eat the spores of these fungi. An ant colony may have 1 million or more individuals to be fed. All the food comes from the agricultural produce. They don't eat the leaves. They produce and they only consume that. So you can imagine the amount of food they have to produce. More importantly, you can imagine how difficult it would be for them to sustain their agriculture. Of course, they will have enemies. They will have pests. They will have soil erosion. They will have lack of nutrients. They have learned to deal with all of that, and they have 15 million years of experience. We can certainly learn a great deal from it. In fact, this is a major activity of research. I'll give you some examples. Just for a moment, look at human agriculture. Human agriculture, we know, originated from 10 to 15,000 years ago. All plants we consume today are derived from cultivars that have been bred and modified for thousands of years, not for millions of years, just for thousands of years. The impact of agriculture on the further development of human societies, of course, has been profound. High rates of population growth, urbanization, economic surpluses, and of course, spare time to invent culture, art, and the sciences. None of this would have been possible if we didn't have agriculture, if each of us had to go into the forest and hunt for our food for the given day. What about ant agriculture? Fungus farming ants originated 50 million years ago. There are 200 different species of ants. They are all obligate fungus growers, which means the only food they eat is what they produce in their garden. They are all leaf cutters. They never consume the leaves, and they only use them to cultivate the fungi. The most interesting thing is when a new ant colony is formed, when the daughter ant leaves the mother's colony, she is offered a tuft of fungus as the dowry which she takes to start her own garden in her own house. The efficiency both for human and ant agriculture comes from the fact that we grow monocultures. That's why agriculture is so efficient. We cultivate monocultures. We also do that. They also do that. Now, the problem with monocultures, it comes with a huge cost in the form of loss of genetic variability. Because everything is very similar, pests can invade very quickly and have a field day because all the things they find are very similar to each other. So there is heightened susceptibility. Unlike humans, which depend on pesticides, ants use a complex mix of strategies. This is where we have much to learn, and people have discovered what strategies the ants use to get rid of pests from their fields. The success of ant agriculture is manifold. First is their gardens are underground. So already they are shielded from the pests in some ways. But more importantly, they carefully monitor and physically, manually remove the parasites, remove the pathogens. They spend a lot of time doing that. Ants maintain a reservoir of crop genetic variability. They do not really use one kind. They have many different kinds and they mix these. And they, of course, use biological control to deal with pathogens and parasites. But their biological control is very different from ours. What we do is, as soon as we have a problem, we go and import one species of parasite from some other part of the world and bring it here. That's not what they do. Ants do not suddenly bring in an exotic species. Instead, they continuously select, engineer, and cultivate a consortium of microorganisms which they then use to control infections. It's interesting to ponder the contrast between human and ant agriculture. The farming ants have undergone major evolutionary changes themselves while having caused few changes in what they grow. They have changed, and rather than changing their crops. On the other hand, humans, we have not changed, but we have changed our crops. That's a big difference. And there's a consequence for this difference, because this means that the ants have adapted to the crops. We are trying to adapt the crops to us. I now want to give one example from information technology. What can we learn here? Actually, insects have a very different kind of intelligence. Every individual insect may appear to be stupid, but as a group, they have group intelligence, collective intelligence, which we call swarm intelligence. And there's a lot to learn from this swarm intelligence. I will take just one example. Ants do something very clever. If there are two ways to get from their home to the source of food, they will always find which is the shorter one and use the shortest one. Now you might wonder, how do they do this? It is not that they walk on both the paths, measure the distance, and have some wisdom that the shorter one is better for them. No. The way they choose the shortest is by a very simple physico-chemical process. And this has been studied in a very interesting way in the laboratory by a man called Jean-Louis Deneubert from Brussels. What he did was he constructed glass tubes between the nest of the ant and the source of food in the laboratory. So here, for example, is a short path, here is a long path. And when he set this up in the laboratory, surely in the beginning, ants were randomly using both the short and the long paths. But within about 8 minutes, almost all the ants were using the shortest possible route to go from home to nest, from nest to food and back. And the long parts were completely ignored. How do they do this? They do this simply because, like honeybees, ants also produce pheromones. And as they walk, they lay a trail of pheromones. And Jean-Louis Deneubert came up with a simple, brilliant idea. He said, ants first take either path, short or long, randomly, but whichever they take, they mark with pheromone. Now, the simple consequence of this is that the ants that took the shorter path will return sooner, and therefore that particular path will get marked with twice as much pheromone. The longer one will take, and therefore the next ant will choose the shorter one because there will be more pheromone on the short path. Simply, there is more traffic on the short path because it takes less time to go back and forth. So the colony's efficient behavior of choosing the short path emerges from collective activity of individuals. The individuals are not intelligent. They don't measure distances. They don't know that the short one is good. They follow simple rules. Two rules. One is, as I walk, I should produce pheromone. Second is, I should follow the pheromones of others. Now, if they do these two things, automatically they will choose the shortest path. This kind of automatic thing is what we call emergent. That is why we call this swarm intelligence. Swarm intelligence has many advantages. It is flexible. The group can quickly adapt to a changing environment. Suppose another shorter one becomes available, they'll quickly be able to use that. It is robust. Even if a few ants make mistakes, it doesn't matter. As long as the majority do the right thing, it works. And this is called self-organization. The group needs no supervision, no top-down control, nobody to tell them what to do, but these things happen automatically. We call this as distributed intelligence. The intelligence does not lie in any individual insect, but it's part of the group. And we use the term emergent property. The ability to choose the shortest path is a property that emerges from the collective behavior of individuals. It does not reside in any particular individual. It's not there beforehand. It happens when they begin to act. And this is a very special kind of intelligence, and we can learn a great deal from this. I want to take one example. This particular method, which I told you now, has actually been used by people who are trying to make more efficient telecommunication, more efficient internet speed. These are the lessons from this. In fact, there's a whole branch of computer science called ant colony optimization. Ant-inspired algorithms have been developed by computer scientists. In fact, there's a whole branch. There are books on this subject of ant-inspired algorithms. They're using this to improve telecommunication, to improve internet, in fact, even to improve cargo handling by airlines. I will take one example from robotics. Now, it turns out that insects estimate how much distance they have traveled by what is called as measuring optic flow. They actually measure image motion on their eyes, how image goes backwards. And this is demonstrated by a very brilliant experiment by a man called Mandyam Srinivasan when he was in the Australian National University. What he did, he trained the bees to fly through a small tunnel and put a computer-generated pattern on the walls of this tunnel. Because of this, there was too much image motion on the bees, and the bees thought they had flown a long distance. When they had flown 6 meters, they thought they had flown 200 meters. So he's working in this area, and in fact, he's written a book called Flying Insects and Robotics. In the book, he says, flying insects are intelligent micro machines capable of exquisite maneuvers in unpredictable environments. Understanding these systems advances our knowledge of flight control, sensor suites, and unsteady aerodynamics, which is of crucial interest to engineers developing intelligent flying robots or micro air vehicles. And these are actually being put in practice. I'll take one or two other very interesting examples, how they work. Now, if you take an ant and drop it in water, she will probably drown and die. But if you take a whole group of ants, they are fine. What they will do is they will instantly make a waterproof raft. And this picture is actually a waterproof raft made by ants. And you can easily do this in the laboratory. And in the next slide, I'll show you a video of what the ants will do if you drop a whole bunch of them in water. A single ant struggles in water, but a colony can float for days together. Groups of ants link their bodies together, make waterproof rafts with a self-assembled, self-healing hydrophobic surface. Some ants have to, this is very interesting, some ants have to inevitably remain wet and uncomfortable at the edges, and this appears to be achieved by coercion by the rest of the group. This is a fine balance between cooperation and conflict that is so characteristic of insect society. Some individuals are always willing to sacrifice themselves. Honeybees will kill themselves in order to protect the colony. A few ants will not mind being wet and uncomfortable for the welfare of the rest of the group. I'll show you a little video here. If you drop a bunch of ants, this is what they will do in just a few minutes. They are holding each other's legs and making a raft. Nobody tells them what to do. And I will show you the properties of this raft in the next slide. This is the raft, and you can see how robust it is. If you try to push it, it won't go down. The ants will not separate. This is how ants can survive for days together. What about managers? Managers have much to learn from insect societies to see how insects organize their work. It turns out that all of these insect societies, whether it's ants or bees or wasps or termites, they practice efficient division of labor and efficient work organization. The responsibility to perform different tasks is assigned to different members of the society based on their relative age, their proximity to tasks, and ability to perform tasks. No leader or top-down control is required. There are reserves. We think of them as lazy individuals, but they can chip in as soon as there is an emergency. If there is a sudden demand for more work, if there is a sudden death from individuals, if there is sudden damage to their nest, these can come in and chip in when there is an emergency. At other times, they appear to be lazy. Now, finally, I come to human affairs and moral philosophy, something that is of great interest to us. In fact, this is the kind of thing that I am particularly interested from the wasps that I study. This is the wasp that I study. It's also a paper wasp. It also builds its nest from paper. But fortunately for me, it does not cover its nest with an envelope because I want to see what's going on. Here I can see all the wasps, and you can see these rather beautiful adult wasps sitting on the nest, and you can see it has a hexagonal honeycomb-like paper nest it has made. Some of the nests have larvae, you can see here. Some of them have small eggs, here you can see, and some of them have pupae. So everything can be observed, and we study these wasps, I and my students. Dr. Gadagkar, I told you that initially I wanted to do all the work myself, and I was persuaded to train a large number of students. I have taken his advice very seriously, and over the years I have trained a very large number of students who can catch these wasps, bring the wasp lab, and every wasp is marked with colored spots of paint so that every wasp has a name, and we can recognize every wasp as an individual. And we can do this for hundreds, maybe even thousands of wasps in the laboratory. These are the large number of students, Dr. Gadagkar, I have trained because of your initial suggestion that I should train students. All of these students have worked with me over the years, and we have discovered many things about these wasps. I'll tell you only one or two very interesting things. Like the honeybees, every wasp has a queen. But in the case of wasps, if the queen dies, one of the workers becomes the next queen. And if she dies, another worker will become the next queen. So there is a succession of queens. And we have studied this succession. And I can say that we are probably the only ones, or at least the first ones, to construct a royal pedigree for an insect. So this is our best pedigree that we constructed. We had queen number 1. She was replaced by her daughter. Queen 2 was replaced by her sister. Queen 3 was replaced by another sister. But queen 4 was replaced by her niece. 5 was replaced by sister. 6 by sister. 7 was replaced by her cousin. And so we are actually able to follow how these successions go on from time to time. From that, we have been able to show that in the case of wasps, queens are replaced either by their daughters, or by their sisters, or by their nieces, or by their cousins. And the remarkable thing is that because this succession sometimes happens rapidly, wasps live in extremely complex joint families. In the wasp colony, you might find sisters, brothers, nieces and nephews, cousins, cousins' offspring, mother's cousins offspring, and even mother's cousins' grand offspring. We've been able to calculate this. We've been able to calculate how many of each kind are there. I'm very fond of saying that these wasps will put any Indian joint family to shame. That's the kind of complex society in which they live and work. We have also shown that when you remove the queen experimentally, immediately one of the remaining will become the new queen. They do not fight after the queen dies. They seem to decide beforehand who the next queen will be. And that's why we claim that there is a heir designate. Even though we cannot, in fact, one of the most frustrating things in our research is that we cannot identify who this successor is before we remove the queen. But once you remove the queen, within minutes we know who is the next one. But in the presence of the queen, she does not reveal herself to us. However, we have shown by experiments that all the wasps, however, know who she is. The heir designate is known to the wasp, but not revealed to us. And by having this successor identified and agreed upon beforehand, they minimize within group conflict. But this doesn't mean they don't have conflict. They can have enormous conflict with outsiders. We did one experiment once where we actually brought in wasps from another colony in Mysore and introduced the wasps to the colony in Bangalore. And we found that when the members of one colony were introduced into the cage of another colony, the response of the residents to the intruders was fascinating, was actually very nuanced. They did 3 kinds of things. Young alien workers from the Mysore colony were freely admitted to come. Please come, join, you're most welcome, you can join my colony. The old alien workers were allowed to live, but only away from the nest. As long as you are away from me, I don't mind. And finally, the alien queen was located, attacked, and torn to pieces. So they can recognize, and their conflict is not random. They don't do carpet bombing. They actually do this in a very, very nuanced way. And we can make arguments how all of these 3 things are very adaptive to the particular wasps. So there is war and there is peace. They are able to appoint a heir designate beforehand so that there is no quarrel if the queen dies, and they are able to kill foreign queens. The wasps have a great propensity to make war with outsiders and an equally great propensity to maintain peace with insiders. From an evolutionary point of view, war with outsiders is easy to understand. It's actually easier than cooperation with insiders. But war with outsiders is not of much use unless you can combine it with peace with insiders. If you're having war everywhere, it's not useful. The only advantage of having war with outsiders and maintaining the integrity of your group is if you can cooperate within groups. It is this dual strategy, this ability to tread a fine balance between conflict and cooperation that accounts for the success of insects. In fact, insect societies are amongst the most successful animals in the entire ecosystem. In some forests, they actually contribute more than a quarter or more than half of the biomass. And that's why we call them superorganisms. Now, actually, we humans are the same, aren't we? I'm very fond of a quote by the French philosopher Voltaire, who said, "It is lamentable that to be a good patriot, one must become the enemy of the rest of mankind." And that's what the insects do. That's what we seem to do. People often ask me, why do you study social wasps? As I said, there's much to learn for chemists and for farmers and for technologists and IT professionals. But in my case, I study wasps for the same reason that anthropologists study humans. Because I think there's always much to learn from another society, from the point of view of sociology, of politics and moral philosophy. But I certainly do not think that we should imitate animal societies blindly. In fact, we should not imitate nature blindly. But I do think that they can hold a mirror to us and offer us a means to reflect on our own shortcomings, on our own advantages, and therefore help us to learn more about ourselves. So that's really what we should use them for, not blindly imitate them, but use them to understand ourselves better. And that is the major sort of goal of my research. I want to understand humans better by looking at how other societies have dealt with the same problems that we have, come up with different solutions, better solutions than we have. Can we do something similar? Is it appropriate for us? Maybe not. Maybe we don't want to kill a foreign queen, but there are many things to learn. And that is the main reason why I am interested in these societies. But as I said earlier, there are many things for many different kinds of people to learn from insect societies. And it depends on what you're interested in. And I hope more and more people will take interest in this. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and giving you these examples. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. We have been getting some feedback by way of chat messages.
Okay.
Awesome, so interesting, fascinating, and so on. There have been some questions also. So I would request the person concerned to unmute himself and ask the question. In fact, one of the questions was, what is the lifespan of a wasp?
It varies, of course, a little bit from species to species, but typically the so-called workers have lifespans ranging to a few weeks. They live for a few weeks, they do their job and they die. But interestingly, the queens can live for months or even years. This difference between the queens and workers is most spectacular in ants, where the workers have lifespan for about a few weeks and queens can live for decades. And from a scientific point of view, this is very interesting because the workers and queens are made from the same kind of egg. They have the same genetics. So it's just the food they eat can bring about a difference in lifespan from 4 weeks to 4 decades. Just the food. And in fact, now many people are using these insect societies to understand how to live long. There is actually research going on in trying to understand senescence, aging, longevity, how it can be influenced by the environment, because they're the same genes.
Yeah. I saw a few other questions. Now, would the person, whoever wishes to ask a question, would he like to unmute himself? Yeah. Yes.
Can I?
Please. Go ahead, TSS.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, come in.
Yeah. See, my question is regarding sex pheromones.
Yes.
In the 60s, 70s, and all that,
Yes.
I remember some work was being done. See, normally these pheromones are released in such minute quantities,
Yes.
in the order of nanogram, picogram levels.
Yes.
And for chemically analyzing those things, you require very sensitive instrumental techniques.
Yes.
Like EMS and all that, for
Yes.
separating the complex things and then studying the
Yes.
structure.
Yes.
Now, around 70s, 80s or so, there was some research on sex pheromones.
Yes.
The idea of using that to attract the male insects
Yes.
and kill them at one place. Instead of using pesticides, spreading it all over the fields, you
Yes.
have these pheromones, sex pheromones,
Yes.
of the specific locus that attracts them to one place and then kill them there.
Yes.
So you don't use, number one, you don't use pesticides which pollute the environment, and you kill the insects at one place.
Yes.
What is the current status of this field?
Oh, it's very, very popular method. People actually we call them pheromone traps. So you actually have a pheromone applied to a certain surface, and you keep these boards in the field, and the insects, the pest insects, will come and get trapped on this. And they have some sticky thing there, so actually get caught and cannot escape. And then you can take them off in the morning. So these pheromone traps have become very common. But what you have to do is, the pheromones can be extremely species specific.
Yeah.
You have to find out what is the pest that you are troubled by and isolate the pheromone from that pest and synthesize it in large quantities and then manufacture these traps. The insects, of course, are extremely sensitive. In fact, we have good reason to show that an insect can detect a single molecule of the pheromone. The receptors of the insect are so sensitive. So actually you need very small quantities, but nevertheless, you have to identify these pheromones, and then you do what is called a bioassay, where you actually put it in the lab and see whether it actually attracts the insects. And then you make these traps. It is a very common method of pest control, but it doesn't work by itself. It is part of what we call integrated pest management, where you use various things together, and pheromone traps would be one of them.
But how successful activity? I know these insects are extremely sensitive.
Yes.
Even pheromones of a species, the subspecies, you can't fool them easily.
Yes.
And their ability to detect such small levels per se is not only so fantastic, but detecting that in the presence of other overwhelming strong smells.
Absolutely.
Really amazing.
Absolutely. So see, there are two things. One is species specificity, another is sensitivity. Now the sensitivity works in our favor because you need very little. The species specificity works against us because for every species you have to make a fresh one.
Yeah.
But the two together, people are actually using this quite successfully in many cases.
There's another question. Who does the queen bee mate with?
Good question. So mating never happens on the nest because they want to avoid inbreeding. See, because on the nest, all the males are her sons and she won't mate with them. So the mating honeybee is very interesting. In fact, it's not yet fully understood. Queens mate only once in their lifetime at the beginning before they even start laying eggs. So when a new queen is born, she actually goes on what we call a nuptial flight, and then she comes back after mating. But there are many more interesting. First is she mates in flight, not on the ground, and she mates with a large number of males. She gathers sperm from all these males and stores them in her body and nourishes these sperm, keep them viable, and uses them for the rest of her life, which may be 2 or 3 years. And she's able to keep them in viable.
That was my question. Thank you. Very interesting.
She keeps them in her body. And the reason why she does this is that it's too risky for her to go again to mate. Because once she started laying eggs, she is very precious for the colony. The workers won't let her go. They will just keep her captive. But before she starts laying eggs, she goes and gathers a lifetime supply of sperm from many different males. And this thing about many different males is also very interesting because by having sperm from many different males, mixing them and producing daughters with different fathers, she's able to create genetic variability within the colony, which allows for division of labor, which also allows for disease resistance. Because now a single pathogen cannot wipe out the whole colony because there will be different levels of sensitivity. But the mystery which we have really not understood, how do the males and queens meet? How do they know where to go? It turns out that there are certain sites which are called drone congregation sites. And drones all congregate there and the queens go there and then they mate with the larvae. And all this happens in flight. But for the male, every act of mating is also an act of suicide. The male dies every time he copulates. But the female then mates with a number of
So it's wonderful. It's a wholly matrilineal society.
Yes, in fact,
even more than in Kerala.
17th century, there's been a nice name given to these insects. They're called feminine monarchies.
I see.
But there is a very interesting story to this. Before that, the honeybees have been known to everybody. Aristotle talks about them. But nobody could believe that the head of the colony is a female. So they always believed that the head is a king. So the queen was called a king. In fact, many people said the honeybee ruled by a king. And not only that, the amusing thing is, there were people who argued against Queen Victoria, saying that Queen Victoria cannot be the Queen of England because even in honeybees it's the king who rules. But actually it was the queen who rules. And then later on they discovered that this king has eggs in his body and he's laying eggs. And only in 17th, 18th century, people actually found out that it's a queen, it's a female.
Any other questions? There's one other question which was about the quotation from Voltaire, I think.
Yes.
Said, what does the quote really mean about patriotism? I mean, how does it...
well, I think he was on
that unless you have an external threat.
I mean, after all, what is patriotism? Patriotism is you think the people in your country are great, and which means just beyond the border they are not so great. So this is a very strange thing, and that's how humans have lived for many years. Humans have always lived in small groups, and they always distinguish between in-group and out-group. And it's only by maintaining this integrity of groups that they've survived. And philosophers, of course, are free to wonder about this. Think, does it make any sense at all? Is there any real rational logic to believe that? Because, of course, everybody believes that their country is the best, but logically that cannot be true, right? So, Rakesh Sharma said when Mrs. Gandhi asked him, how does India look? He says, Sare jahan se acha. I'm sure, the Russian would have said something similar and the American would have said something similar. But of course, rationally, this is not possible. Unless you are like George Orwell and you say some are more equal than others. So philosophers, of course, find ways of making fun of this.
Here's another question, which is generally a more sophisticated method of agriculture, ant agriculture or human agriculture, or can they be compared?
They certainly can be compared. Well, see, again, you have to look at it very carefully. The ants are doing something different, we are doing something different. So what the ants are trying to optimize and what we are trying to optimize is somewhat different. In the case of ants, they are not worried about spare time. They don't want to spend time in art, culture, science. They're all willing to work. And that's why manually they actually physically remove the parasites. Now we cannot do that. We would like a few people, in fact a few machines, to produce all the food for the rest of us. So what we are trying to maximize is different. Nevertheless, there are things we can learn from them. As I said, we don't want to imitate them, but what aspect of their agriculture we can incorporate in ours. That is what is being learned.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Dr. Lakre.
I wanted to know how many senses they have in terms of insects. We all talk of human senses, the taste, the smell, and the eye. What kind of senses do the insects have? And how do they communicate? You gave one example of the bees, through the racket dance and all that. But my original question of an ant, what are they doing when they touch each other and go back and all that?
See, the basic senses are the same as ours, but it's interesting that the sensitivities are very different. For example, take vision. We have a certain visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum in which we can see. Beyond that, we cannot see, right? But the ants also have a visible spectrum, but their visible spectrum is shifted compared to ours. For example, they are blind in the red wavelength, but they can see ultraviolet. We are blind in the ultraviolet, we can see red. So for example, there are many patterns among flowers and so on, which we cannot see, but they can see. Many flowers have dark centers and bright surroundings. We don't see that. But we can see it if you shine ultraviolet light on it and have a sensor. So their sensitivity is different. They certainly have very powerful vision. They have very good sense of smell. Their olfaction is very well developed. Many animals, we all agree that my dog has a much better sense of smell than I have. So at least one sphere, humans have accepted that dogs are better than us, right? We can't smell as good as the dog. Similarly, there are many things which animals are better than. So their sense is very smell. Their sense of sound is very well developed in many insects. Many insects communicate simply by singing, by acoustic communication. And there's a whole spectrum of this acoustic communication, all the way to where it simply means vibrations, air field vibrations, surface vibrations. There are different sense organs to detect surface vibrations. There are different organs to detect airfield vibrations. There are, of course, ears. Many insects have their ears on their legs. Okay. Many insects have their taste buds on their legs. When a fly lands, it doesn't have to constantly keep sipping and seeing whether there is food. The legs sense whether there is food.
Oh my God.
So the basic senses are same, but their sensitivity is different. The way they use it is different. So every animal is different. That's why every animal is valuable. Every animal has its own things to teach us about. And I think we are really making a great mistake in assuming that we are the custodians of this planet and we don't need anything else and we are the best. We are not. There's so much we can learn from other creatures.
A couple of more questions. In fact, more questions are coming in. One question is, what happens if the queen bee accidentally dies? Is the next one ready with mating and with all the sperms?
Now, this is where it depends. In my wasp, there is no problem. There is one ready. As soon as the queen dies, one of the ordinary individuals is elevated to the level of the queen and nobody disagrees because all been decided for it. Now, that is possible because in my wasp, the queens and the workers, they look alike. They're not different. In the case of honeybees, the queen is a very different individual. She's a much bigger individual. She has a different physiology, different morphology, and a worker can never become a queen. So if the queen dies, there are only two options. One is what we call emergency queen rearing. They will have to find an egg or a young larva and give it that special food which makes it into a queen and rear a queen, de novo. Until then, they are queenless. But if they don't have eggs, if they don't have young larvae, they will all die. There is no way in which and they will never accept a foreign queen under natural conditions. So if they don't have young larvae to rear a new queen de novo, because the distinction between a worker and queen is decided at the very, very early stage in life. An adult cannot change. The advantage my wasps have, they can change.
Okay. One more question. Recently, I have read about anthill art. There's a question from a friend of mine. The artist pours molten aluminium into abandoned anthill and gets a labyrinthine work of art showing passages of anthill tunnels.
Yes.
Looks wonderful. Any further light can be thrown on this? Can you throw further light on this?
Not only is it a work of art, but it is a marvel of engineering. The way it is constructed, it has so many properties of climate control, of temperature control, carbon dioxide control, all of that. It has extremely interesting engineering properties. And the third level of interest is how is it made. So people now begin to study. Again, you see, the termites are not intelligent. They have to have these kind of simple rules. How is a termite mound made? How does it come to have all of these properties? So all of these three things are being investigated in great detail and they're absolutely fascinating. How it is made, what its properties are, of course it's a work of art, but it's also a work of supreme engineering.
Okay, the last question. Will all the bees die if the queen bee dies?
Yes.
And do they turn upon their own?
When the queen dies, if they are not able to rear a new queen, all hell breaks loose. They fight with each other, they kill each other. But if they can rear a new queen, they will hold on. But if they cannot, then they will fight.
Wonderful. It's been wonderful having you with us.
Last comment. Would the Queen Gadagkar like to say something? Geeta?
Sorry?
Would the Queen Gadagkar like to say something? Geeta?
Yeah. She will have the last word.
Yes, Geeta, tell us something.
Please
about
come in.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. No, I said already with my question.
No, sorry. Geeta, there's several Geetas.
Okay.
Please.
Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I can only say that I thoroughly enjoyed every time he gives a talk. I enjoy. Hundreds of times I've listened to him, but yet I enjoy the talks that he gives. It's been a wonderful journey of my life with him because I worked in the same department at Center for Ecological Sciences till I retired. and I could see the passion that he has for his wasps, so that I could understand. And there was no kind of conflict at home, because I knew what exactly is happening in the lab. So yeah, it's been wonderful. I hope someday that we will be able to meet physically and come to your setup, and so that
most certainly.
more
Once we come
interactive
back
and
to the
yeah.
normal, we would like you to come over
Thank you very
and
much.
spend some time with us.
Yeah.
Workers we have now.
There was another Geeta who wanted to say something.
Yes.
No, I didn't know. Because I direct plays here, I thought Mr. Laukare is referring to me. I said,
Sure.
anyway.
He is one of our active members.
You direct
So-
plays in
In Athashri.
In Athashri.
In
Yes.
Athashri. So
So
I just thought that's why he's calling on me. Anyway, I really loved the talk. It was so
do you get all of these?
so interesting. So interesting. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, we would like to come. When we come, actually, we would like to see one of the plays going on.
Oh, sure.
That's right. We'll organize something for you.
Yeah, we'll definitely organize something for you.
Nice to see all of you. Yeah, very nice.
Thank
So
you.
what about the scientist, Geeta? What is your field?
Well, I worked with Professor Madhav Gadgil, who was basically conservation biologist. So all my projects involved conservation biology, and I also worked as a technical assistant for him throughout, entire career. In fact, what happened was, when Raghavendra and I were getting married, he went and told Madhav Gadgil that
I'm getting married.
and then he asked, what does she do? She's a biologist. He said, oh, can she assist me? And a week later, I joined him. Until I retired, I worked for Professor Madhav Gadgil on conservation biology, basically, and human ecology kind of things that he did.
Okay.
So it was a fascinating experience.
Thank you very, very much for joining us.
It was wonderful.
I think today's program has been very well timed, right on time. Bharat,
Yes.
may I request you to give the vote of thanks?
Yeah, no, it's an amazing talk, Professor Gadagkar. It was really very fascinating, and I'm not the only one. I could just tell from the comments and the enthusiasm of the people asking the questions that they were just totally captivated. I'm in the teaching field myself, so I recognize a really good teacher when I see one. And the first ingredient at the university level and beyond the first ingredient is passion for your subject. And that comes across so clearly. Obviously you love it. You'd rather be knee deep in wasps than other things in life, I'm sure. And that comes across, and that kept us very fascinating. I personally learned a huge amount. And I just found all the life lessons that you were drawing from these, not just wasp societies, but also the honeybees and ants, really very relevant and well chosen by you as well. And that's in some sense the right time as well. The sort of stresses that we have on our ecology today, it's actually critical that we understand every aspect of nature, and in particular the insects. And as I recall, you actually said more than once, I think you said this about bees, but maybe you also said it about wasps, that they're about 50 million years old.
Yes.
That's like not too far from when I think when the meteor hit, right? And so in other words, they're really old, whereas the humans, we are relatively young. I think we descended from chimpanzees only like 5 million years ago or something. So it's hubris on our part, humans, to think that we are biologically superior. We're not. And as you were trying to emphasize, they have been on the planet much longer, and they have evolved techniques for staying within their boundaries and in a sustainable manner. And we are just really wrecking the planet as we speak. So we need a lot more people studying every aspect of nature around us. And I'm glad to see you have done that and have trained. It was an impressive array of students that you put up, and I'm sure if there'd been space, you'd have put up a few more pictures as well that you put out into the world of ecology. And thank you, Geeta, as well for your work. And I've had other people also tell me they'd like to have you back again as a speaker, and that maybe that will be in person. But if we don't have a vaccine or a cure for COVID soon, we can have another Zoom session.
That's right.
Okay. So with that, I thank you again and hope to meet you. I personally come to IISc often, so I'm sure I'll run into you sometime. I work with people in electrical and ECE and so on. Sundar Rajan. So,
Okay.
yeah, okay. Vijay Kumar and Sundar Rajan.
Okay.
All right. Nice to have you both. Thank you. All right. Take care. And Mr. Raja, I think should we end the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So on that note, shall we end the meeting?
Yes. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.